I'm ready to tackle another sewing project. The last one went so well, I left on a high note, and I've got some ideas. So this is one that I had picked out a little while ago that we're going to work on today, and if this one goes well too, I've got a few more lined up. This is a pattern that I found online. I believe it was a pay what you can sort of pattern. So you can sort of offer a donation to the designer if you'd like to, or download it for free. I did already download it, print the PDF, and assemble the pattern pieces and get the pattern pieces cut out. So I'm one step ahead. I did notice when I was doing that there are no written instructions in the pattern, and when I went back to look, they're in a blog post online, which explains its occasionally free status, because you do have to go through the little struggle of ad-riddled blog posts in order to follow the directions, which is an added difficulty for me because I filmed these videos on my phone, but now I also need my phone to look at the directions. So we'll see how this one goes. Anyway, let's talk about what I'm making. It is a mini backpack. I go on vacation every September with my friends to a Halloween event, and I thought it would be really fun to use some stash fabric, including scrap fabric left over from past Halloween projects, to make a little Halloween themed backpack to bring with me when we go. Every single item here is from Stash. There are elements of it that are going to come across as a little hodgepodge, a little make, do, and mend, but the idea is that I don't want to spend any money on this. I just kind of want to use what I have and have that same gratification that I had with my last sewing project, which was a wedding guest dress. If you didn't see that one, check it out. Because the best part of that was going through Stash and finding all of the notions and everything I needed and not needing to run to the store or invest any money in it. I have this pattern that I made a table runner out of in the past. So it's this sort of spooky floral with some spider webs in the background, and of course all of these skulls. I don't have a ton left. There's maybe somewhere between a quarter and a third of a yard here. I don't know. There's not very much here. It's got to be about a third of a yard. It looks about a foot tall, but I don't know how much I'll need for this project. It's scrappy. We will make adjustments as needed to make it work. I'm just going to use it as an accent fabric, basically. The pattern also called for a sturdier fabric, and I was pleased to find that I have black canvas in my stash. Again, there's not very much of this, but there's definitely more than there is of that novelty print. So the majority of the backpack will be this black canvas, which will also add a nice structure to it that I wasn't expecting to find in Stash. This fabric you might recognize if you've been around for a year or so, because this is the sort of shiny synthetic satin that I used to make the lining when I crocheted myself a dress last year. So I sewed a little slip dress out of this fabric to go under a crocheted dress. There's plenty of this left over, and I thought this would make a nice lining to the backpack. So they're not quite exactly the same, but I think the vibes are there. And as for notions, if you were around last year, you'll also know that for the same vacation I crocheted that dress for, sewed myself a backpack convertible bag sort of thing. And when I did that, I bought from Amazon this big pack of bag hardware. It's all in this sort of antique bronze color, but it's one of those things where if you go to a craft store and buy the actual quantity that you need for a bag, it's actually more expensive than just buying a great big quantity off of Amazon. So I have all these extras, so I don't even need to buy bag hardware. It called for some extra trim around the edges, and I did find from one of my many vintage hauls these black tapes. Now this one on top, I believe, is one of those elastic lace trims that were popular in like the 70s and 80s, but these two, I think, are just like linen or cotton tape that I could use for the edging. And then we have zippers. The zippers are the bit that gets a bit hodgepodge because they're not the same color. They're not quite the length they're supposed to be, but I'm going to make adjustments as needed. So this one is sort of a reddish color, and it's a shorter one, 7 to 9 inch zipper, I believe. So that's like an accent pocket or an internal one. This 18-inch zipper is going to end up being the main one. It's a sort of middle gray tone. And then this 12 to 14-inch zipper is black. Again, they all go with the fabrics. They don't really go with each other, but we are making do and diving in with only Stash materials. So let's get out my cutting table and cut out the pieces. Okay, got all of my pieces cut out. Since the bag is assumed to be one color and not have this accent fabric that I've chosen, I cut all of them out of the black canvas because that would normally be the fashion fabric. Or I cut, all the ones that say you need to cut the fashion fabric out of the black. And then the places where I decided to do the Halloween print, I also cut out that one because I think it needs the sturdiness of the canvas. So wherever I use those pieces, I will treat those as one. I will stay stitch them if I need to baste them together. So I've decided that the body of the bag, which is the front and the back, the bottom, will be solid black. And then the pockets, the pocket that goes on the front, the side pockets that go on either side, and the top gussets that go across the top will all have the fashion fabric on them. I also noticed that when the pattern calls for 2-inch cotton tape, which is why I pulled out this thinking it was for some sort of piping, it's not. It's actually the straps of the bag. So I'm not going to be using this. I'll put that back in my stash. And what I did do was cut 2 strips of the canvas, the right length. Actually, I had to piece them. I don't know if you can see here, but I've got a little seam because I was a few inches short of the full length specified in the pattern. So I did read through the pattern enough first to know that you're not using cotton tape because the edges are going to show, so the raw edges won't matter. They're going to be sewn up eventually anyhow. I believe they both get folded in like tape and then sewn, so it's a 1-inch wide strap in the end. And I believe that is also the first step of the pattern. So let's get to sewing these straps. Okay, I just wanted to pop in with a little update. This pattern is wildly confusing. I didn't realize I started in the middle of the pattern by accident because apparently it's split between 3 blog posts and I accidentally somehow was on blog post 2. I don't think it's a big deal because all I've done is sew the straps and that doesn't matter if you do it out of order. But then when I went back to blog post 1 and started reading through the instructions, it's really quite vague. It's skipping steps, it's assuming you know a lot, and my assumption is that when this was written, the person that wrote it was an amateur or beginner at designing patterns. So I would not recommend this for a beginner. I consider myself a beginner with sewing. I've been doing it for a while, but not very frequently. And I'm finding it difficult and confusing because they're listing out the steps in a way that they're like sew the zipper in between the layers of fabric, but it's not naming the pattern pieces that you cut out. Like I'm used to a sewing pattern saying sew the zipper between, pattern piece A and C, or pattern piece front top and lining front top, that kind of thing. They're not using any terminology. It's just a lot of photos with very few words, and the wording is really, really not helpful. I'm going to press on. I don't think it's a huge deal. I think I can piece it together, but I will say that it has kind of dampened my enjoyment of the project because I didn't think I was going to have to do so much thinking and like puzzle solving to be able to sew a little pattern today. But I'm starting to get frustrated, and I don't think it's entirely my fault. This pattern is not the best choice. So far, I have managed to basically sew the zipper into the 2 zipper gussets with lining and top stitch it. The instructions are very confusing and possibly out of order on the blog post. Again, it's constantly just saying sew the fashion fabric and lining, pin the fashion fabric and lining without specifying which piece of the pattern we're talking about. And I can see in the photo tutorials that there's more pieces added in than there was in the last step. So it's really difficult to follow. I did try to watch a portion of the tutorial video instead. And in the video, there's this side gusset piece that, if you see, clearly says cut 1. And in the video tutorial, she's using 2 of them. So presumably I need to cut 1 more each of the lining and fabric and interfacing for this. So that's it's just not a very well written pattern. It doesn't seem like it was checked by anyone. It seems like somebody wrote a pattern in their free time, filmed a tutorial, and wrote up some blog posts, and that's it. Like there was no weights and measures. What is that? Weights and measures? Checks and balances. There was no feedback involved in the process. So it's really, really confusing and starting to get frustrating. I guess I'm just going to cut out another gusset and kind of try to follow along in the tutorial video, maybe. Also, I didn't get to mention earlier that I did use, I misunderstood the strap instructions, and I did have to pull out that black edge. It might be bias tape, but I don't know. I assume I'm just going to call it bias tape, or that like cotton tape that I thought I didn't need. I did need it because you're also supposed to have some sort of ribbon to cover up the cut edges. So it did come in handy, and also I'm pleased to be using more stash in that way. But as far as actually sewing the bag together, progress is going slow and it's irritating. I guess I'm gonna go back to cutting out more pattern pieces. Also, I'm assuming here that I have to do the mirror image because that's how she was laying it out on the bag, but this piece did not specify, obviously this one just said to only cut one, so why would I cut a second one? This pocket piece says cut two, but it didn't specify. It's directional. There's a rounded corner here. It didn't specify to cut them in opposite directions. I think I followed every step. The video tutorial is more helpful than the written pattern, certainly, but she does fly through it, and I still think skips steps. Maybe they're obvious steps to more seasoned sewists, but to me, it's frustrating to sit down at the sewing machine and then realize, oh, I was supposed to have pinned these things or done this, ironed this first. And I'm starting to get irritated, and I've gotten to a point after sewing this interior pocket. I don't know how this attaches, but I just finished with that. The next step is to start preparing the straps and doing all the hardware, and that part really ticked me off when I made a backpack last year. So I think I'm going to take a break and come back to this when I'm a little fresher and a little cooler. Maybe later tonight or tomorrow. I don't know. But I don't think it's a good idea to proceed to something that I know was difficult for me last time when I'm in this particular headspace. So I'll be back when I'm ready to tackle the straps. All right. So I did sit down and try to understand this pattern a little bit more. I certainly did not read through the whole thing and try to understand the whole thing because I think that would be too much information at one time. So what I've determined is that, yes, there are steps missing from the instructions at the beginning when it tells you how to cut out as many pieces. In the past, when I've made patterns like this, even when there are pieces that there is not a specific outline and portion in the paper pattern for, at that same stage in the pattern, it will tell you to also cut rectangles this many inches by this many inches or what have you, so that you cut out everything at the same time. The other confusing element is that there is the video tutorial, which kind of helps. How do I say this? The video tutorial isn't necessarily any more well put together than the blog posts, but it has different information from the blog posts. So like I said, it's kind of like a puzzle, a little mystery between the 3 blog posts and the pattern pieces I have and the video tutorial. I'm kind of piecing together what I need to do, but I'm sure I'm going to continue to make mistakes because it's really not well written. Why I got confused yesterday is because apparently the video is just one tutorial that covers all 3 portions of the blog sections, but it doesn't delineate between them. It's very snappy. It's super quick. You kind of can't keep up with it. I had to pause it and backtrack a billion times yesterday just to get the zippers done. And what I realized is that it went right from part 1 right into part 2 without saying anything. And then when I went back and rewatched it and then went back and reread through the end of part 1 in the instructions and read the beginning of part 2 in the instructions, I realized that there is a section, you know, when you read a blog post for like a recipe or something like that, and there's that, you know, giant chunk of unnecessary backstory at the beginning when you just want to get to the recipe and they're talking about when they were in college and used to take long walks to get to sugar from the grocery store or some ridiculous thing, and you're like, why is this happening? I just want a recipe. I think my brain associates the top of blog posts with useless information, and I skipped past some parts to get to the parts that looked like instructions. But in fact, in those long chunks of paragraphs. At the beginning, there was some useful information, and she was talking about cutting more of the cotton tape to make the tabs on the backpack. So again, I wish all of the information about cutting all of the pieces was included at the beginning of the pattern when I was in the cutting stage, because now I'm backtracking and doing things out of order, and I find that very counterintuitive and frustrating. And I like to task batch, so it makes a project really not enjoyable for me if I'm not given all the information I need when I need it. I don't like you to just like sprinkle crucial information throughout the pattern in weird places. That's not the norm, right? So again, I've complained about this pattern enough. I'm going to try to not complain anymore and just move forward and do what I can. I made my straps. I had very little of the sort of bias tape that left over at the end, and in the pattern she's using literal cotton twill tape for this, and she specifically says that using it like this folded over would be too thick, too many layers by the time you fold it again and again and have all the layers of fabric. So I don't think I can do this again, and this is primarily my fabric that I just folded over to use, and I think doing that would make it too bulky to sew through. So I'm gonna have to go through my notions again and see if there's anything that might be strong enough. I mean, I don't need much. I think I need like 2 little 4-inch segments of it. Let's go through the drawer and see if I can find anything that would work for this. Oh wait, I did have this. All right, another step just casually barely mentioned is inserting this zipper in the back to add a pocket inside the back lining. So that was actually the next step. I did that. I did swap out the zipper for a different one other than the one I showed at the beginning. The one I showed at the beginning was like 12 inches. And even though the pattern called for, I think, a 9-inch zipper, this 7-inch one fits just fine. So this is another vintage thrifted zipper. And it's metal and it's a little sticky, but who cares? I've got the tabs sewed in at the top and at the bottom. I did double over the zipper, or not the zipper. I did double over the ribbon here. I don't know if you can see, but there's 2 layers of ribbon holding each D-ring in place. And I folded the cut ends under here and left the folded end out. So, yep, on to the next step. I will concede that step, I don't remember, whatever, the second portion of the second section of this pattern was pretty easy to follow for me. It was adding the straps on, and specifically adding the straps and the hardware and the little foldy bit at the bottom here, which I have done before because I made a backpack last year. I do think that this particular section of the pattern was easy to follow. But I had to slog through so much nonsense to get here that whatever. I was trying to be nice and pay one compliment to this pattern, but I don't know. So I opened up section 3. I'm now on the 3rd and final blog post of the instructions. And the first thing it says is, oh, also additional materials that you'll need for this section. It's a bunch of bias tape. So like we discussed earlier, I do have a bunch of black bias tape in my stash, but it's really annoying that they don't tell you up front all the materials that you actually need to actually make the pattern. All right, I think I need a little bit of a break before I come back, but this is the last section, so I should be able to actually finish it. Want to have a look at my mess? It's not too bad over there, but there's a lot going on here. Anyway, yeah, so I've still got the back panel, the front panel. Over here is the pockets for the front. Wait a minute, that has a zipper. Oh, I guess I do need that other zipper. This must have been an optional pocket that they didn't tell you needed a zipper for. Chaos. The top with the top gussets already attached. Inner pocket. Side pockets. And the bottom. Oh my gosh. All right. I'm exhausted. I have a headache. I have not been having fun. I'm very sick of this pattern. I ended up kind of doing this weird improvisation. They do say to cut bias tape. I would like to just add, because I cannot stop dragging this pattern. She says to cut bias tape, but she doesn't tell you what material to use. So again, you have to like read ahead through the pattern and work backwards. The lining fabric. It's extremely sloppy. My stitching is ugly and it's all wonky, and I don't care because this is the inside of the bag. I'm very tired. I'm quite nearly done. I think all I have left to do is add the pockets to the outside. But of course, I finished sewing all the inside stuff and realized that the zipper is zipped. I've sewn myself in. I don't know how easy it will be to unzip it from the wrong side. This is not making my day any better. Okay, I had some time to cool off. I had a rest. I took some headache medicine. Feeling a lot better overall. I was able, after a while and a lot of effort, to finally unzip this, which revealed that the seam I did around the bottom was really poor and missed the corners. I really don't understand how the corners were supposed to line up, because a couple of the pieces were curved, but they didn't quite line up with each other. So when I start to turn it right side out, you can kind of see the corners. Oops, that one's okay. But I thought more than one wasn't okay. Wait a minute. Oh, there's a little bit. Boop. A little tiny poking out there. This one's the worst. So I'm going to have to redo that bottom seam, which sucks because I already went through and did all the bias tape and did the sort of finishing. It's not like my finishing was particularly pretty anyway. So I'm just going to have to cut it in closer there. It's this corner that was the problem, and that one's a little uglier anyway. So I'm just going to use the contrast color lining colored thread and go over. I don't care. At this point, I don't care. It's going to be inside the bag. Nobody's going to see it. My sanity is on the line at this point because this has become such a stressful thing when it was supposed to just be like a fun little weekend project. So I'm going to try to fix that and then add the pockets on. This is crazy. This is not working. I've been thinking as I've been struggling through this particular project that at the beginning of this endeavor and this video, I described myself as a beginner sewist. And I mean, in a lot of ways I am. I haven't attempted a lot of stuff, but I do think I have a lot of secondhand knowledge from watching a lot of YouTubers that are more advanced than myself and just absorbing information about how sewing works based on a lot of the problem solving that I had to go through on this project and on the last couple that I've done as well. I mean, I think I'm ready to bump myself up to intermediate. I think this is not quite beginner level problem solving that I'm displaying, right? I'm going to decide to give myself a little more credit. It can be so hard to give yourself credit about things. At least for me, I always worry that people think I'm passing myself off as, more important or knowledgeable than I am. I don't think beginner really covers it anymore. I do think I have a lot of knowledge about this, if not that much experience, but I'm advancing, certainly. So I'm sure some of you probably noticed, as I was discussing this, how weird it would be for me to sew these on after the whole bag is done. And props to you for thinking farther ahead than I did. But obviously, you should have added those when you're doing the side seams that are already on the same area of the bag. But once again, the directions are so unclear and never once mention the name of any of the pattern pieces. So I overlooked that. And now the bag is effectively done and I didn't add the side pockets. It's cute, but the side pockets would be really useful. Maybe I'll just hand sew those too, because I don't know what else to do right now. For the two pockets, I did machine hem just along the top because that's going to be exposed, and I have now just pressed the rest of the edges under with the iron, and now I'm just going to hand stitch them to the side, and then this will be done. Well, this project ended up being cursed, haunted, all sorts of spooky that I did not anticipate. There is no disguising the fact that this one was a doozy of a project. I definitely didn't have fun, but I definitely did learn a lot, and I do love the backpack that I ended up with. I used it my entire trip. It worked great just to carry around the theme parks and also as a makeshift project bag while I was knitting and waiting in line. I would absolutely not recommend that you make this pattern, but because I used it, I have linked it below if you're curious. This one was a bit of a roller coaster ride. I'm so pleased that you stuck around to the end. Thank you so much for watching and supporting the channel. I hope you'll consider subscribing if you haven't already, because I would love to see you back here in the future for more heartwarming content than we had today. Thanks again. I can't wait to see you in the next one.